Hey there everybody, this is Matthew Naiman with Shutterstock.com, and today we're looking at Sahara. Sahara is a collection of over 90 visual effects elements captured optically in 4K. Elements from Sahara are compatible with almost any nonlinear editing system, but let's start by taking a look at Sahara in Adobe After Effects, Adobe Premiere Pro, and Final Cut Pro. Why don't we get started? Here we are in Adobe After Effects, and as you can see we have a clip of a broken down building with a nice little dolly move going along it. Very cool shot, I kind of like it. We're going to pick a spot to work in, probably somewhere just after this reveal, right around there. I'm going to cut our clip, let's back it up, let's jump to the end of the clip, and I'm going to set our composition to end there, and we're going to go to composition, trim comp to work area, just so we're only working with what we want to work with. I really think this shot could benefit from some dust falling in the foreground and maybe some ambient dust swirling around to give it a little bit of atmosphere. So why don't we see how to add that? The first thing that we're going to want to notice is that this shot has very definitively a moving camera, and well, we could go in and individually track some spots to add some dust to. I think we're going to get better overall results using Adobe After Effects 3D Camera Tracker. So why don't we see about how we motion track this shot first. I'm going to jump up to the tracker window. I'm going to make sure I have our footage selected, and all I'm going to do is click Track Camera. It's going to say that it's analyzing in the background. Why don't I jump down to one view just for simplicity's sake for now. And under Advanced, I'm actually going to click the little thing that says Detailed Analysis. You can think of that as a try really, really hard button to make sure that your track works. Why don't I fast forward while After Effects does its thing, and I'll meet you back here in a second. And we're back. After Effects has run its 3D camera solve after tracking, and why don't we take a quick look at what comes out the other side of the 3D camera tracker. As you can see, if I highlight the 3D camera tracker effect, we get all these funky little points, and as I roll over them, we get this crazy little target. As I scrub through time, you'll see that the points move stuck to their relative places, and basically each of these little crosshairs is a point that After Effects has managed to track in 3D space over time. It has not solved for a camera yet, because it's waiting for me to choose what I want to orient it relative to. So I'm actually just going to pick 4 random spots on the floor, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll notice that our target, especially if I up the target size, looks like it's laying flat on the floor in proper perspective. Now I can right click, select Click Solid and Camera, and now when I RAM preview, you'll see that my solid sits on the floor as if it were actually in the scene. Really, really handy. The camera tracker in After Effects usually does an excellent job with very little input. I tend to think it does a great job, especially for non-hypercritical tracks like this. Now that we have a reference, I can scrub back through the plate, and by highlighting the 3D camera tracker, I can find all of our points again. And while we're here, I'm actually going to generate one more thing. I'm going to select a few points on this post, and I'm going to generate a solid, and we're going to call this one Foreground, and let's scale it to roughly the size of the post. This probably won't fit perfectly as the camera moves, but it'll serve as a relatively good foreground matte for what we're about to do. I'm also going to just rotate a little bit, minus 0.3. Yeah, it's pretty good. And then as I scrub back and forth, it stays mostly where that pillar is. I'll have to do a little bit of animating to keep it in exactly the right spot. But for now, that's fine, and I can shy that layer. Why don't we jump over into our project panel and select some dust. The Sahara collection comes with over 90 visual effects plates, and they're all beautifully shot powder on a black background. They really, really do a wonderful job of sort of simulating dust and other debris, sand, that kind of stuff, and I think they're really going to make this plate look great. So I quite like this dust falling. Why don't we grab it and drag it onto our timeline? You'll see it's much bigger than our comp because we're working in 1080p and all this footage is given to us in 4K. I'm going to scale it down for now. And very importantly, I'm going to set it to be a 3D layer. I'm also going to pop back to 2 views so that we can actually have a look at our scene. And you can see that that track solid that's on the floor is represented there in our 3D workspace. I'm going to change the name of that solid to floor so that we can keep track of what everything is. And we can also see where our foreground layer is, which is right here. By looking at our foreground layer and by looking at our floor, we can get some idea that if we wanted dust in space behind that pillar but not that far back, we could grab our 3D dust layer and move it back in space probably around there, and then scale it back up to the size that we want. Right about there. And I'm just going to change the blend mode to screen very quickly. And you'll see, as our 3D camera moves, the dust moves in perspective perfectly as if it actually existed in that space. Awesome. I'm now going to just shift that a little bit off to the side so that it's obscured partially by the pillar. And we're going to take our foreground plate. Let's move it over a little bit. Add a keyframe. Roll back in time. Slide it just to the edge. That'll add a keyframe. Back to frame 1. Add a keyframe. And we're just trying to keep it so that this solid keeps just cutting off the edge of the pillar. We may have to add some rotation over time as well. So I'm going to add keyframes for rotation there. And then jump to probably just about the last frame we're going to have to keyframe. And why don't we make this -1. You can see that the pillar's not entirely straight due to camera distortion, but this will be good enough. I'm going to drag our foreground above the dust. Then I'm going to select dust. And we're going to use this foreground layer above it as an alpha inverted map so that our dust will only show up where that layer is not. You can see it's not quite perfect. We have a little bit of a gap there. We actually could fix that by sliding over our anchor point a little bit. And then to make up for this lens distortion, let's mask this layer out. That was a mask thrown on our foreground layer. You just can't see it because it's shied. And then I can add a little bit of a feather to the mask just to make the divide a little bit less harsh. Much better. Nice, you can see the edge there is cutting off the dust. And now let's just add some static dust hanging in the air here. We have all of these wonderful dust lingering plates. I think something like that will work perfectly. Let's grab it, drop it on as a foreground. Once again, scale it down a little bit. And once again, make it a 3D layer. And drag it into our midground. Put it somewhere where we want it. Scale it up. I'm going to scale it a little bigger since the camera has to travel past it. And we're going to set our blending mode to screen to knock out the darker parts. And let's make sure it doesn't end up off camera. You can see it goes off frame a little bit. And frame 1, it isn't. So I'm going to move this all the way to the left. Then let's move our anchor point all the way to the right. And by the end, we can see we just need to scale it up a tiny, tiny bit. All right, let's RAM preview. Let's also disable our floor layer, and let's take a look at our Sahara elements in our 3D motion track shot. There you go. You can see how in just a couple of minutes, using elements from the Sahara pack, we've livened up our beautiful dolly shot in this abandoned warehouse and really added a dusty, gritty atmosphere to it. Why don't we jump over to Adobe Premiere and have a look at how we can use some Sahara elements in that piece of software. Alright everybody, and here we are in Adobe Premiere, and it looks like we're working with a clip of a sad dude walking away in a broken down building. Hey, Shutterstock, where did you find this footage of me? No, I'm just kidding. I'm sitting in front of my computer in my underwear. Anyway, I really thought this shot would look kind of nice if we added just a little bit of ambient dust in the air. We're not going to do anything too fancy with it, but I wanted to use it as an excuse to talk about how to deal with some slightly problematic footage in Premiere. Now, the reason this footage is slightly problematic is because we have a moving camera and there really isn't a way to motion track in Adobe Premiere without a ton of work. Even if we wanted to do a manual method where we put the anchor point on a detail and kind of go around frame by frame and do it manually, There's also some rotation in this shot, and it would just be a whole lot of work to get that to happen nicely. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to exploit an effect that comes in Adobe Premiere, and I'm going to go into my tab, and I'm going to type warp, and then we're going to grab the warp stabilizer and throw it on top. And immediately, you see we get this bar across the footage that says Analyzing in Background, Step 1 of 2. And off to the left, we see a time remaining under Warp Stabilizer. So why don't we all just sit here quietly for 30 seconds and wait. Wow, I can't believe you all actually sat with me for 30 seconds. Oh, now they're telling me that in post-production they sped that up, so it really didn't take very long. I actually had to sit here for 30 seconds, and it was terrible being alone with my thoughts. Anyway, under Warp Stabilizer, you'll see that that's gone, and we probably had a little orange bar there for a second that said stabilized, or something to that effect. And if I hit play, you'll see that it's still not perfect. Our footage has kind of turned into just a smooth pan and tilt. Well, that is possible now to motion track in Premiere. I actually would rather just make this a totally static shot. The way I'm going to do that is under Stabilization, instead of Smooth Motion, I'm going to select No Motion. It says Stabilizing again, and now it does its best to keep that footage absolutely stationary with zero movement. And it does a fantastic job. So now that our footage is stabilized, we can jump back into our project panel, we can go into our assets, and we can find some nice lingering dust. Something like that looks pretty nice. So we're just going to grab it, throw it on our timeline. Under the effects controls, under blend mode, we're going to set our blend mode to screen. We're going to scale it up a little bit. And I'm actually going to hit copy and paste, Command V, Command C, or what have you. I'm going to throw another layer on top, and I'm going to scale it up a little bit more. And I'm going to shift it in time a bit so that we're not looking at the same dust in two different points of time. This will just add another layer, and it'll let me take my larger layer, and under Effects, we can go to Blur, and we can select a Gaussian blur, and blur the foreground layer a little bit, just to kind of make it look like it's a little bit closer to camera. I don't even need to adjust the color on these because it matches the background footage pretty well. And if I hit play, we've added some atmosphere to our shot. So why don't we jump over to Final Cut Pro and have a look at how to achieve a similar effect over there. Alright, and here we are in Final Cut Pro, and it looks like we have a shot of a Jeep driving through the desert right towards us. It's coming straight for us. Could we see his license plate, or did he blurred out his license plate. Otherwise we could find that guy and take his Jeep. I'm disappointed. So, the first thing I want to do is I actually want to speed up this footage a little bit, because I think it's a little bit too slow. So, under the time tab, I'm going to twirl it down, fast. Let's make it run 2 times as fast and take a look. Oh yeah, that definitely looks better. In fact, I would not be surprised if that was the frame rate this was initially shot in. So, first thing I want to do is we're going to add just some lingering dust over the shot to kind of amp up the deserty look of all this. I'm going to select our clip, we're going to go to blend mode, we're going to go to screen, and that should immediately put a little bit of a sandy haze over top of everything. Now, it's very subtle. We can sort of see it more when we're under the truck. I'm also going to set some opacity keyframes because we should really only be able to see this dust when there's a lot of light hitting it. So I'm going to set an opacity keyframe, jump forwards till the truck is blocking everything, and then let's turn it way, way down. And then once we're back here under the truck and there's some light, let's turn it up a bit. Let's hold that to about there. And then once the truck's gone, let's turn up the opacity all the way again. And that should just make our dust look a little bit more natural, look a little bit more settled into our environment. Brilliant. I also think we can amp this up a little bit more with some sort of low-level dust. I'm going to look at one of these dust throws. So we're probably not going to want to throw any dust in this, but I like the dust settling after the throw. So why don't we grab one of these clips from that point and drag it onto our timeline. Let's just see how that plays out in time with this Jeep. I think I'm going to speed this clip up as well. These are shot at 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second, so there are going to be times where you're going to want to play with the speed. Let's set it to 2 times speed. And we're just going to use this dust sort of slowly settling after the Jeep drives by, as if it kicked up some dust from off screen from one of the tires as it went. So let's throw that on top, maybe over here, and we're going to scale it up a little bit. And by about this point, I'm also going to change the blending mode to screen so we can see what we're doing. By the point the Jeep is passed, we're probably going to want this to have been stirred up. So let's add a keyframe. But while the Jeep's passing, let's turn the opacity completely down. I think we can actually bring it up a little bit later. Great. And we're probably going to want to tint this a little bit so that it blends into the footage a little bit better. So why don't we jump down to color, tint. Let's throw it on there. But let's not leave it purple because that won't make much sense. Let's go for a nice sort of orangey to help it stand out. Sometimes screen effects can get a little bit hard to see against a bright sky. That's a little orange. Or I could just use my eyedropper and select some of the dirt and then darken it and amp up the color just a bit. Don't need to do that. And we're actually going to turn down the opacity a little bit more. We really just need it to come down as soon as the Jeep is off out of frame, and hopefully we won't really notice that transition. Now, it would be nice if we could hold on this last shot afterwards, after the Jeep's gone. So what I'm going to do is go to the end of our footage, go to the last frame, select it, go to our time drop down, and I'm going to click hold, which will add a frame hold on the end and let the clip play out a little bit longer. Also think I want to fade out this lingering dust. Let's add a keyframe. Whoops. And there actually is already a keyframe there from our previous animation. And at the end, I'm going to drop that down to 0. And let's take a look at our shot. Well, everybody, that's it for me today. For more great-looking stock footage, visual effects plates, and tutorials like this one, be sure to visit Shutterstock.com. I'm Matthew Naiman, and I'll see you next time.